What are antinatalists arguing for? Not all antinatalists agree on the same things, but there is a common shared belief that procreating is morally problematic, usually for multiple reasons. They'll argue that if you really want kids, you should adopt because it's the most ethical thing you can do, while procreating is the least ethical thing you could do. In her most recent video, Unnatural Vegan, UV, attempts to argue against this position. Unfortunately, she ends up arguing more against the child-free lifestyle of two specific individuals instead of antinatalism. Let's first establish that being child-free and being an antinatalist are two separate positions. Child-free people often recognize the issue of overpopulation, but there's also often very little that links them to antinatalists. UV critiques one type of child-free person, the one that is, quotes, anti-kid, because they want to live a more carefree life with, without the added responsibility of caring for a child. While this type of child-free person definitely does exist, that person cannot be said to be an antinatalist. Antinatalism is a philosophy that is closely associated to philosophical pessimism, and which argues that we should not abstain from procreation for our own sake, but for moral responsibility, so for the sake of others. So, in the same way that UV doesn't like it when people judge veganism based on what they've seen of Durian Ryder and Freely or some other vegans' beliefs that she does not share, she shouldn't be judging a position based on some specific people, which is really what she does here. Unfortunately, she does very little to separate antinatalism from the child-free plus style of those that she critiques here. Anyway, let's start watching some of her clips.
Hey guys, veganism and antinatalism. This is a thing. It's a pretty popular thing among vegan YouTubers. Freely and Durian Ryder and Vegan Gains and others saying that not only do they not like kids and they don't want any themselves, but that this is actually the right thing to do, that not having children is actually the moral thing to do. Many of you have asked me to do a video on this, and recently Freely and Durian Ryder, they've talked about it a lot in the past, but they have a more recent video on Freely's channel called Why I Hate Kids, where they express this rather haphazardly, like in many of their videos, but I think the main points are expressed well enough that I can critique it here.
First, I have to say that I haven't seen Vegan Gains make this argument. I have seen all his videos on this topic, and his motivations were pretty clearly self-centered, for the most part. He said that he strongly dislikes kids, and he didn't want a girl to possibly control him and enslave him with a kid. He also claimed that because of his mental health history, it was a logical thing for him to do, to have a vasectomy. So yeah, not wanting to impose mental illness on a kid is the closest thing to antinatalism that Vegan Gains ever said. But he never actually publicly held the position that it is immoral to have kids, which is the position of an antinatalist. An antinatalist doesn't just believe that he shouldn't have kids because of his genes. He will say that no one should have kids regardless of their genes.
But maybe Freely just really does not like kids and just doesn't want kids. That's fine. But I think wearing it as like a badge of honor and presenting it as this moral high ground, as she and other vegans are doing, I think it's weird, and I think it comes across as pretty misanthropic.
Next, UV claims that they are taking the moral high ground from a misanthropic position. Now, this is clearly questioning their motives, which is not an argument against antinatalism, for sure. This becomes an argument about Freely and Durian Ryder and their child-free lifestyles. And it's really strange to see a vegan use the words taking the moral high ground, since that's one of the first criticisms that non-vegans will use just to distract from an argument made by a vegan. Let's just focus on the argument instead of the attitude of the messenger.
Society is so, pushing women especially into having kids. I mean, in their teens, late teens, it's and even my mum, she's just doing what she's conditioned to do as well, is saying, when are you going to have grandkids? She's given that up now. But for a long time, she was like, when are you going to have grandkids? And why don't I have any grandkids?
There may be undue pressure from parents and society in general, placed on women to get married and to have children.
There may be undue pressure? Nope, not may. There is a huge pressure on most people when we live in a pronatalist, capitalist society. The main motivator of such a society is growth, not compassion or sustainability. And the main individual motivator is what Ernest Becker coined as our Immortality project, which for most people ends up being the most basic expression of immortality, procreation. Essentially, through procreation, people are unconsciously believing that they are cheating death. Having a family is the main conscious goal in life for most people. Even Louis C.K., whom Yuvi mentions in her video, has been recorded saying that, quotes, life has no point if you are not going to have kids. Now, this strikes me as the exact same argument that religious people make when they claim that the lives of atheists are meaningless without God. But the truth is, people simply have different immortality projects. In other words, people will try to cheat death unconsciously through different hero systems. Louis C.K. also said that he, quotes, knows too much about life to have any optimism. For someone who sees life in such a bleak way, he certainly didn't mind throwing new consciousnesses into the thresher to make his life more interesting. Personally, I'm more of a Bill Hicks and Doug Stanhope fan. They weren't wishy-washy. In fact, they both made a solid case for people sucking, and followed up by making the case that we shouldn't be making more people. They're also just more funny.
Sometimes the American news is like a tired old whore that only tells you what you want to hear. You watch stories every day about the environment and global warming, and they give you 1,000 cute little tips on things you can do to help Mother Earth, when the major problem is obviously overpopulation. That never comes up, ever. Even Al Gore has to be pressed on the issue to admit that it's even a problem, and he'll go, of course, overpopulation is a really big problem, but that's going to correct itself. And, by 2050, he says, I guess fucking will go out of style. It's just a passing fad, this desire to procreate. The news knows you don't want to hear that. The news has no problem telling you how to save the earth by cutting up your six-pack holders before you throw them away so you don't strangle a dolphin when all that shit gets flushed out to sea. And that's fine. And turn off the water while you brush your teeth. And you go, I'll do that. They can't say, oh, and don't fuck in the front hole, because that glut of humanity you're creating is the real problem behind this. Nobody wants to hear, don't fuck in the front hole after a hard day at work. An Oregon State study just came out that shows that a woman who already recycles at her optimum will still increase her carbon footprint 40 times by just having 2 children. The next time you see a hybrid car with a baby seat in the back, smash the windows out of that car, Fight Club style. Steal the baby seat. Leave a condom where the baby seat sat, and see if you send a message. because that is every sanctimonious douchebag who pretends to be part of the solution when they're the exact problem that they pretend to be fighting against. Your combined uteri wreak more havoc to the environment than 1,000 Dow Chemical Corporation accidents combined. You don't have the baby, you could drive an entire fleet of Hummers to and from work every day, hanging your ass out the window and farting styrofoam packing peanuts into the atmosphere and still not cause a fraction of the damage that one stupid baby causes to this planet. If you want to help Mother Earth, try sodomy. Sodomy is eco-friendly and abortion is green.
I think there's also a level of wisdom and experience that a self-absorbed, I know everything woman who says she'll never have children just doesn't have. How many people, how many women, how many men in their, late teens, early 20s, late 20s, even 30s, have said that they hated children, didn't want kids, never going to have kids, and then went on to have kids, and then went on to say that raising kids was the most fulfilling thing they've ever done. It's not uncommon. So in my
Here UV seems to be saying that we shouldn't take people seriously when they say that they don't want kids and that we shouldn't have kids. Why? Because in her experience, so many of them end up having kids anyway. This is the weakest form of argument. It really doesn't matter if they don't follow up. If she really believes this, then she should believe that no one should take vegans seriously when they argue for veganism, since the recidivism rates among vegans are so high. I propose a more logical option. We should treat people's arguments in isolation. Remove them from the argument being made, and decide what you should do with the information rather than focus on what other people ended up doing.
sister and I used to say that we're never having children, and my mom would reply, rather smugly, "We'll see." I get it now. And my sister, mother of two, she certainly gets it.
So she says, I get it now, and my sister, mother of two, gets it now. And this is supposed to be a case against antinatalism? This is like if my brother gave up veganism, and I was influenced by him, and I also gave up veganism. And I acted like I was above critiquing. And I said, well, you'll see. Maybe one day you'll get it too. Well, let's see. What is there to understand from this? I'll propose this theory. Most people take the path of least resistance. They conform to the society in which they live, in which they grew up, because life is much easier as a result. They don't have to deal with isolation and constant confrontation. I propose that this same theory is also why we have so many people that, when asked, will say that they love animals. Yet they choose to eat them and support a system that exploits and tortures them in the worst ways imaginable. And this is the reason why vegan parents and future vegan parents and optimists like UV are deeply misguided in their firm belief that their children will be vegan and stay vegan. But more on this later.
Parents wanting their children to procreate when they come of age, of course, is not necessarily selfish. Again, for many, having children is the most rewarding experience in their lives.
Wait, what? How is that not selfish exactly? If people are having children to enrich their own lives, then it is by definition self-centered, regardless of how much of their time is, quote, sacrificed for them.
It really means that those people who are having children are being selfish. I think this is a really skewed view of parenthood. Raising children is hard work and involves a lot of sacrifices on the part of the parents.
Look, you can't have it both ways. You can't create a situation in which someone depends on you for their well-being and then claim that you're being altruistic for doing the only decent thing that you could possibly do as a result of creating that situation. Perhaps you would be able to see the absurdity of this position by looking at the case of someone like Nicholas Koch. The article says that, quotes, he's surviving on little else other than pain medication. Nicholas lived what his family called an incredible life. He taught us everything. He taught the love, how to be family. He taught us everything. So a boy without a brain was brought into this world, lived a pointless and ridiculously short life of pain, so that his parents could be taught everything? Now, there's no doubt that they sacrificed a lot of their time to this boy before he passed. So we shouldn't say that they were being selfish? We shouldn't think that they created unnecessary harm for selfish reasons? You know, it reminds me of a quote in Marvel's Daredevil. There's a line in there where he says, "You don't get to create danger and then protect us from that danger. That's not heroic, that's insane." In the same way, I believe that you don't get to create a being that has desires and needs that need to be attended to. And then, when you do your best to satisfy their needs, you believe that you're being altruistic and heroic as a result. That's just self-congratulatory and self-deceit.
You know, there's no reason that we need to pop out another hungry mouth to feed.
There's 153 million fucking orphans on the planet.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it when I found out that there's over 150 million. It's just like, it's crazy
That's
to
like-
have more kids.
That's like 7 times the population of Australia almost, like 6 times or something. That's crazy.
Yeah, so there's a lot of there's a lot of hungry mouths to feed already.
Adoption and fostering are wonderful. There's no doubt about it. But I do find it interesting that seemingly none of these pro-adoption vegan couples actually end up adopting or fostering any kids. The excuse typically is something like, we don't like kids, we're happy the way we are, we like having the freedom to do whatever we want. I think this is weird. It's a little weird coming from vegans, especially people who are supposed to be the most compassionate, the least selfish, those who prioritize others' feelings and well-being over their own desire for pleasure and the freedom to do whatever they want.
Adoption is wonderful, but... really? That's it? Not even a slight encouragement? Let's not encourage people to see that adopting is clearly more ethical, because I want my own kids, damn it. I'm sorry, but that's really what it comes down to. She says it at the end. She wants kids. Just like there are very few meat eaters that are going to claim that it's unethical to eat meat, there are very few people who want to have kids who will claim that it's unethical. But you know, some people come around and they admit that they made a mistake. Some of them become antinatalists and they contribute positive things to the cause. Jim Crawford being perhaps the perfect example. She's confusing Childfree with antinatalism here. She critiques people who are clearly more into the child-free lifestyle, i.e. they don't have kids because they are selfish. This is a separate subject, again, and should be treated as such. Most antinatalists I've talked to actually tend to find that child-free people are generally obnoxious and missing the points that they are making. Like I've said before, antinatalists are not concerned with optimizing their happiness levels, they are concerned with doing the right thing, which is why, as I argued in my previous videos, veganism and antinatalism are in a way sister philosophies. Both positions claim that by abstaining from doing something, which isn't right but is considered normal, we will be reducing suffering. I and others have also pointed to the fact that the argument being used here is a red herring fallacy. It's an appeal to motive. She is distracting from the point being made that adoption is clearly more ethical, and she questions their motives for making the argument.
It's weird.
A lot of people are like, oh, you guys have got to have kids because they're going to be like, they're going to change the world, you know, they're going to be vegan leaders, and that's all very nice to think in that way. Hey, that might be a reality, but the chances of it not being a reality are far stronger.
Evidence? I don't think we can rely on recidivism rates of vegan adults, which are high, and apply them to kids who have grown up vegan.
Evidence? As I said earlier, human beings are social animals and conformists by nature. This is very well documented and really quite self-evident. I mean, if you're not convinced of this, just look up herd behavior and how far it can go with something like the Milgram experiment. Nonconformism is the exception. So I'd say that the burden of proof is on you to demonstrate how you arrived at the confident conclusion that you will almost certainly create a vegan leader or a flexitarian at worst. Generally speaking, I am aware of way more people who have rebelled against their parents than those who have followed in their footsteps. I don't know about you. All of this brings us to the essential question to ask. Is it ever vegan to procreate? I made a video arguing that it's not. Now, perhaps your definition of veganism is different from mine, which involves doing the best that we can to reduce our negative impact on animals. When we are creating more people, are we reducing the impact that we have on animals? Nope. In every single instance imaginable, we are not. And if we subscribe to the least harm principle, we just have to abstain from procreation. Let's look at this. First, even the best, most well-meaning vegans in today's world are still responsible for some animal suffering and death, unfortunately. Now, I won't go into all of the details of this because others already have. I would refer you to Bite-Sized Vegan's video, Vegans Kill Animals. Is it more than meat eaters? In which she concludes, and I quote, "I most certainly do cause inadvertent suffering. It's inevitable. The aim is the continual striving for the reduction of harm." Once we agree that we cause harm to animals, we must agree that our children will cause harm to animals too. We also have to look at the suffering that our children will certainly experience, and the suffering that they are likely to experience as well. Now think about this. By raising a child vegan, you're actually increasing the pressure on them to stand out, which also increases the risk of discomfort and suffering for as long as they do stand out. Note that this would perhaps be understood to be a necessary evil if you were a vegan who had chosen to adopt. But since you're actually creating a new person rather than adopting one, you're responsible for two different sources of suffering. The suffering that was experienced by the person in need that you basically ignored and that you would have saved, and the person that you have created. We all have experienced very negative things in life, and that's because life comes with many unpleasant burdens, and you have just placed an additional burden upon them as a vegan parent. During Ryder and Freely say that they have seen many kids who grew up vegan end up going off the rails. UV goes into this wild rant that they are probably just liars and suffering from confirmation bias and so on. So again, she's showing that this video is really more about them than veganism or antinatalism. Since I have really no interest in this kind of drama or Freely and Durian Rider in general, I kind of lost interest in the video here, but I'll force myself to address a couple more of her points in the video.
Styles? Yes, we are all going to die someday, but is that existential dread really a reason not to live in the first place? We are going to die, and that makes us the lucky ones. Most people are never going to die because they are never going to be born. The potential people who could have been here in my place, but who will in fact never see the light of day, outnumber the sand grains of Arabia. Certainly those unborn ghosts include greater poets than Keats, scientists greater than Newton. We know this because the set of possible people allowed by our DNA so massively exceeds the set of actual people. In the teeth of these stupefying odds, it is you and I, in our ordinariness, that are here. We privileged few who won the lottery of birth against all odds, how dare we whine at our inevitable return to that prior state from which the vast majority have never stirred?
Existential dread? Is life worth living? Again, this is supposed to have something to do with antinatalism, but it's really a different subject. Antinatalism is concerned with creating new lives, not existing lives, and how you can find meaning. So this quote that has Dawkins waxing lyrical about the wonderful world that we have been so lucky to be a part of has been really a laughing stock in the antinatalism community in the past, especially when you contrast it with this other quote of his. The total amount of suffering per year in the natural world is beyond all decent contemplation. During the minute that it takes me to compose this sentence, thousands of animals are being eaten alive, many others are running for their lives, whimpering with fear. Others are slowly being devoured from within by rasping parasites. Thousands of all kinds are dying of starvation, thirst, and disease. It must be so. If there ever is a time of plenty, this very fact will automatically lead to an increase in the population until the natural state of starvation and misery is restored. In a universe of electrons and selfish genes, blind physical forces and genetic replication, some people are going to get hurt, other people are going to get lucky, and you won't find any rhyme or reason in it, nor any justice. The universe that we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pitiless indifference. Wow, that sounds like a great world to bring kids into. The optimism delusion is strong with this one. Let us turn to someone more rational who has influenced some of the greatest thinkers and artists in history. Arthur Schopenhauer said, "If children were brought into the world by an act of pure reason alone, would the human race continue to exist? Would not a man rather have so much sympathy with the coming generation as to spare it the burden of existence, or at any rate not take it upon himself to impose that burden upon it in cold blood?" Let's go back to the first Dawkins quote. Is this what she thinks antinatalism is about? Are we all whining that death is inevitable? A simple Wikipedia search would have shown to her that the concerns of antinatalists are centered around suffering, not around the unpleasantness of returning to non-existence. Most antinatalists I've known actually look forward to this return. It's just the pain on the way there that they are not too keen about.
Or is freely implying that the impending apocalyptic scenario that's a product of human action, that this will make life miserable for everyone, including our children? This may very well be if we don't do something about it now, which is why it's more important than ever to eat more sustainably by avoiding animal products and
Now, the reason we think the planet is fucked, which it isn't, we are fucked, but not the planet. But the reason why we think that is because, yeah, the problems that we're facing, they seem insurmountable. The answer, according to Yuvi, is optimism. More optimism. Because it's not like optimism, which is and has always been the default philosophy, at least in the modern Western world, has led to these problems. Nope. Look, quite clearly the problem is human beings. Yes, we're not the only species capable of violence, which she brings up later on. But the problem with the current state of the world is certainly not caused by chimpanzees killing each other and otters often raping baby seals to death. What is unique is the scale of the harm that we cause. And it's also unique that we can feel great joy in the act of causing harm, just for the sake of causing harm, in the phenomenon known as Schadenfreude. We have driven over 322 species into extinction in the past 500 years. We've also killed 200 million human beings in the 20th century alone. Chimps cannot possibly cause a fraction of this harm. Like Bill Hicks said, humans are viruses with shoes. We are a plague. We don't have a symbiotic relationship with the planet. We're more like parasites. But don't worry, in the end the planet will be fine. But not because of environmentalists.
We're a threat? That somehow we're going to put in jeopardy this beautiful little blue-green ball that's just floating around the sun? Planet has been through a lot worse than us for a long time. Been through earthquakes, volcanoes, plate tectonics, continental drift, solar flares, sunspots, magnetic storms, the magnetic reversal of the poles, bombardments for hundreds of thousands of years by comets and asteroids and meteors, sandstorms, erosion of all kinds, cosmic radiation, worldwide fires, worldwide floods, recurring ice ages, and we think some aluminum cans and some plastic bags are going to make a difference? Planet isn't going anywhere. We are. We're going away. We're going away. Pack your shit, folks. We're going away. And we won't leave much of a trace either. Thank God for that. Maybe a little styrofoam. Maybe a little styrofoam. Planet will be here and we'll be long gone. Just another failed mutation. Just another closed-end biological mistake. An evolutionary cul-de-sac. Planet will shake us off like a bad case of fleas. A surface nuisance. You want to know how the planet's doing? Ask those people in Pompeii who are frozen into position from volcanic ash. How the planet's doing.
It's important to understand UV's views in a broader context and what she's advocating for here. The views espoused by UV can be traced back to the erroneous notion that humans are self-determining, morally autonomous beings. Now, she believes that she's being rational in espousing these views without realizing that this is actually just baggage from our past Christian narrative, which secular humanists and liberals have not been able to discard. This myth, when told by an elite, can be understood to be a noble lie. The concept that a myth or a lie can be advantageous to pursue an agenda and maintain social harmony. When viewed in the light of social psychology, this myth serves as a useful fiction for people to anchor themselves as part of a defense mechanism. This is explored in TMT, or terror management theory, first introduced in the Pulitzer Prize-winning work of nonfiction titled The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker. More on this in a future video. The last point that I want to respond to is where she speaks about human extinction. This is where I believe that she makes the most sensible point in the entire video. If we indeed wanted to reduce suffering as much as we can, and if we could, a big if, the goal shouldn't be to try to drive ourselves extinct and leave nature in its current state. Just do its thing. Removing ourselves from the picture would be a mistake. While this would undoubtedly reduce suffering compared to the suffering that is occurring right now, it would also ruin our chance to eliminate it to the best of our ability. I mean, look, if the world was run by a super powerful leader with an extinctionist agenda, the ideal situation would be to render all life forms sterile and somehow make this planet inhabitable. Of course, this is nothing but a fanciful dream, because even if we did have the technology to accomplish this, human beings are deluded animals with competing interests, and such a task would require humans to agree to pursue this unusual, non-self-serving interest and cooperate on a never-before-seen scale. It's unimaginable. Lastly, UV says in her reply to me in the comments that, quotes, adoption is the most moral position. Yet at no point in her video does she actually say that. The main point of her video is to critique people who have this position. The thumbnail of this video says antinatalism is bad for veganism, and yet she agrees with us that it is the most moral position. I think the only thing that we can conclude from this is that she was confused and she didn't want to critique antinatalism. What she really wanted to critique was these two specific people and their lifestyles.